Salary is a term of employment. Salary doesn't build your career, it pays your bill. If you want to have a higher salary, you got to be worth more. How do you make yourself worth more? What's most valuable to your employer?
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you for having me on. It's good to see you.
Yeah, no problem. Nick Nandan's a great guy. How did it come about? Like, how did you make a documentary with him?
We ran into each other at Strategic Coach at their top tier level of coaches, clients. And he just struck me as a great guy. He said, I want to do a documentary. After my son Brandon and I had done a presentation to the group about our negotiation skills method. He was intrigued, and based on the room we were in, I figured I'd take a chance, and the rest is history.
So Nick Nandan, I know him because he did a documentary on me in my book, Choose Yourself. And he works really hard. And now he's done Tactical Empathy with you. And you've had a fascinating life. Like I saw in the documentary, actually, you had a t-shirt that said, I think it said, live a story.
Live a great story.
Live a great story. Yeah, maybe we could start with that because you've lived a great story and you're still living it, of course. And how do you think you've lived a great story?
You know, I always looked at life as kind of an adventure and a challenge, and just wanted it to be an adventure, and pursued sort of one crazy idea out of left field after another after getting out of small town Iowa. It's been quite a ride.
Well, and the documentary describes how you started out like police and then part of the thing with impressing the FBI was that you volunteered for a suicide hotline for a while.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. I wouldn't think of that as related to negotiation, but it's very much about negotiation. Like, what was your experience with the suicide hotline?
Yeah, it was phenomenal. I mean, I think one real big advantage I had when I went there is I went there to learn. Like, the number one problem keeping those hotlines in business is volunteer burnout. Now, funding is close on its heels with number two, but the volunteer burnout is very high because people go there to help. And if you're there to help, you're emotionally vulnerable. And a lot of the callers are actually highly manipulative. There's a very significant portion of the callers that just suck the life out of you.
I mean, manipulative in this sense.
Well, they have no intention of dealing with their problems. They are what we call energy vampires. Nobody in their life will talk to them anymore because, oh my God, my life is so horrible. They just suck the life out of you. And they come to learn that a volunteer on a hotline is supposed to talk to them. So this is, I'll call somebody on the phone whose job it is to listen to me. And since they never have any intention of doing anything, that they'll suck the life out of you. That's one. And then the other that's very counterintuitive, but is highly difficult to deal with, are the sex callers. And they want to have a live person on the phone and they want to manipulate you. And they generally prefer a female. It's something that females had to put up with far more than the men. The whole time I was there, I only had one sex caller, but the women get them all the time. And they want a woman's calming, soothing voice, and they say, can I talk to you about anything? And then they want to start talking to them about their sexual addictions. And what they're doing is they're keeping a woman on the phone live talking about sexually related issues while they masturbate. And that's victimization. Women don't volunteer on a suicide hotline so they can help a guy masturbate.
Oh my God. It's like a weird kind of OnlyFans.
Yeah, in a very, very well put. And so that burns a lot of people out too. So
what's the protocol when you realize someone's doing that? If you're a woman, do you hang up?
Well, you should just hang up right away. I mean, the minute you sense it, the first thing to do is disrupt their pattern. You shouldn't protest. You shouldn't say another word. I mean, the thing that's most likely to discourage their behavior is an immediate hang up upon sensing that it's there. And that's a difficult thing to train because, a female realizes she's being victimized. She's going to be angry. She's going to respond in anger. She's going to want to tell them off. There's going to be feelings driven by anger of wanting to correct them. And none of that is productive because that's more moments of their voice on the phone with this guy. So the most discouraging thing for them is simply an immediate hang-up.
It's interesting you put it that way. Like, it seems like in every situation, whether it's a suicide hotline, negotiating for hostages, police trying to de-escalate a situation, the most important thing, it seems and I'm just trying, you could tell me if I'm correct, I'm trying to learn from the documentary. It seems is you have to determine what your goals are, what those goals require you to be and do, and then stick to that script. So in this case, your goal is to basically not have this guy keep talking about his sexual addictions. And so whether you're angry, that has nothing to do with it. You have to either just hang up or be quiet, do anything that doesn't keep them talking. That's the goal, so not to keep them talking down that line.
Well, it's the goals combined with, you got to sense their agenda from the very beginning. Like they've got a journey, they've got a destination in mind, no matter what. And if you are willing to open your eyes to the patterns become apparent extremely quickly. So the first issue is to read the situation. And then if they're not going to allow you to obtain your objective, or if you struggling to attain your objective is part of their vision, then that determines whether or not you're simply going to hang up or whether or not you're going to end positively and then withdraw.
So let me ask you about a different situation. So let's say an employee, and I've worked at a place for a year and I've done, I think, a good job, and my workload's gotten bigger, and now I want a raise. So I go into my boss, I'm asking for a raise, but I get the sense that he's just not going to give me a raise.
Yeah, right. All right. So there's a couple, you got to diagnose the situation. Now, employers globally, and I was even made this mistake a couple of times when I was a lead investigator in a case and had a lot of people working for me, because you're going to give your workhorses more work. The people you can count on, the people that you can trust. If you don't watch yourself, you're going back to the same person every time because you can count on them. And so the workhorses get more work, not by intentional bad management, but by naive management. And I remember doing that on a big case I had in New York. We had this thing we had to get challenged, to get done. It was really important. And there was this female investigator named Lou. And Lou was a star. She got stuff done. She was a workhorse. You could always count on her. And this thing came up. I came to the supervisor. It was important. I said, I'm thinking about, we give this to Lou. We know we're going to get it taken care of. And he's like, yeah, okay. And I take it over to Lou and I ask her to deal with it. She blows up at me. She's like, you're dumping all this stuff on me. She says, look around. Look at these people over here. They're not doing anything. Give it to one of them. And I thought, okay. So management can be guilty of that inadvertently. So your diagnosis when you go in with the boss is, are they overworking me because they don't know any better? And so it's a mistake of the head, not of the heart. Now, are they overworking me because they're going to wring every last drop out of me and then they're going to discard me? It's a little more of a heart issue. So you got to know which one it is. Is it a mistake of the head or a mistake of the heart? Now, then from the other side, understand. Empathy is about understanding how the other side sees it and recognizing that and factoring it into your thinking. It's not agreeing with it. It's not disagreeing with it. It's just taking the reality of what they see. In a workforce situation, nobody walks into the boss's office unless they want something for themselves, ever. What does that condition the boss to think of his employees as? Selfish. It's a harsh reality of life. Nobody walks into the boss's office and says, hey, boss, how can I make your life easier? How can I do more while getting paid the same? They're going to walk in with a complaint. I work too hard. I don't get paid enough. This isn't what I expected. Blah, blah, blah. You've got to recognize what employees have conditioned their employers to see them. So you got to factor that in. Now let's talk about salary. Salary is a term of employment. Salary doesn't build your career, it pays your bills. If you want to have a higher salary, you got to be worth more. How do you make yourself worth more? What's most valuable to your employer? First of all, team players. People that want to help everybody. People that want to rise the tide so that all ships rise. To start with. Now, secondly, how do you accomplish that? Good friend of mine from high school, Tom McCabe. I learned this from Tom. One of the most successful guys I know. Great human being, head of an international bank. Tom and I started from the same small town in Iowa with no family connections, no alumni connections, no wealthy families, none. Didn't know anybody, didn't have anything to go on but our ability. Tom's head of an international bank. Every job he's ever interviewed for, every annual review, he asks this question: how can I be guaranteed to be involved in projects that are critical to the strategic future of this organization? And if your boss's heart is in the right place, and 9 times out of 10, it is, they go like, wow, you want to make my life better. You want to play in a championship. You want to be the starting quarterback in a championship game, and you want to know how you could get there. They suddenly see you not as a selfish person, but as somebody that's going to make their future better, which is critical to collaboration. What does the future look like? And you ain't asking, how can I do a better job in my position? Which isn't a bad question. You're not asking what you should ask also at the beginning of any job interview. What does it take to be successful here? Not what are you looking for, but what does it take to be successful here? You're asking for the biggest success possible. So one of two things happen. You get to play in a big game. You got to want that. You got to want to play in a championship. Now, not everybody has the appetite for that. A lot of people want to sit back. They want to be C players and they want to get A player salary. You got to perform like an A player to get an A player salary. And you got to want it. So you're going to get a shot at it, or you've just designated yourself among the senior levels of your organization as somebody to be mentored. And they're going to keep an eye on you. They said, all right, so we don't think Chris is ready for the big game yet, but he wants to play. Let's see what we can do to make him smarter. Let's see if he takes direction. Let's see if he takes initiative within the direction he's been given. It sounds simple, but nobody does it.
And you're saying nobody goes in and says, how can I be a more critical part of the strategic goals of this organization?
Nobody knows to do that. Like, I didn't know it until Tom told me about it. I'm standing back there. I'm going like, Jesus, Tom, dude, you're one of the most successful businessmen internationally that there is. You're the head of an international bank. How the hell do you and I start in small town Iowa? I went to a more prestigious school than you did. Like, I went to Iowa State. It's a decent sized state school. It's on a map. He goes to this podunk school in northern Missouri that nobody ever heard of. And now you are there, brother. And we're sitting around talking about it. A few years ago when I was teaching at USC, we're having candid conversations about how did our journey go? How did we get here? What do we do? And he's like, this is what I've always done. And it's made all the difference in the world. So an example of the reaction in real life to that. I'm doing a negotiation training for sales complement of a large company. We're doing it online on Zoom in a pandemic. CEO is there and his whole sales staff. I do the presentation on negotiation, the keynote. I talk them through the skills. And we do a Q&A. And in front of the CEO, one of the salespeople says, how do I get a higher salary out of this guy? And you can just feel everybody on the Zoom hold their breath. Like, what is he going to say? And how's the boss going to react? And I lay that question out. And before anybody has a chance to react, the CEO says, I wish everybody here would walk into my office and say that.
Does he really wish that?
Yeah, because he wants people to want to play in a big game.
But the guy wasn't saying I wanted to be a part of the big game. The guy was just saying I want more money.
Yeah, but he's, first of all, his heart's in the right place. Mm-hmm. And him wanting more money, there's nothing wrong with that. What the problem is he not rewarding people appropriately, which is then the other possible outcome. You get invited to play in a big game. You talk about it. You negotiate your future. You negotiate your future success. You build your resume over the coming year in a company in a way that nobody else has. What happens if at the end of the year they go like, we don't have the budget for it? What you've done is you've given yourself a resume. You found out that you got a bad partner, like a bad spouse, like a bad social partner who's abusing you, taking advantage of you. But now when you get ready to walk, your resume is substantially more marketable than it was a year earlier. And if they're not going to pay you, you don't belong there anyway, because they are doomed and you need to get out of there. And like any business relationship, like any personal relationship, when the other side is victimizing you, your job is to hit the door, just to get out.
And so this is not necessarily advice for someone who's just walking in and asking for a raise. This is how to kind of set the stage in advance so that you could then have that negotiation and you've primed it just correctly.
Yeah, it's for both. It's for both. And that's why, Tom was telling me, opening interview, there's a couple of other questions in the opening interview. And what does it take to be successful here is a critical one. Which, remember when I was teaching at Georgetown, I'm having a conversation with the people in the career development, whatever office they have that advises students how to get jobs. And I lay that question out, and the woman in there says, yeah, we have them ask that. We tell them, what are you looking for in a candidate? And I said, no, those aren't the same questions. Those are vastly different questions. What are you looking for in a candidate is a question everybody's taught to ask, which makes you sound like everybody else.
And also it sounds like you're going to then be a chameleon and act like what their answer is.
Yeah, there's an authenticity issue there.
Yeah.
And one of my students that was taught to ask, what does it take to be successful here? You're in front of an interview panel. Understand what that panel is the committee. And their job description is like a dating description. It's probably not exactly accurate to what they're looking for. So they got people on a panel, and there's somebody on the panel that does not want to be there. So why is that person on the panel? Because that person is extremely successful in a business and is tired of the revolving door of candidates that are not what they say they are. And he or she is there studying it. So the student of mine says, what does it take to be successful here? And the silent person on the panel leaned forward and said, no one ever asked this thing, and laid it out. She ends up getting the job later on, and the other people on the interview panel says, that's the first time he ever spoke. And he's on the panel because everybody here respects him and he knows what he's doing.
And so one thing that's kind of common among this is you mentioned the word disrupt. Like it's almost like you have to do some sort of pattern disrupt in the way you're talking to people. You have to sound like you said, oh, what does it take to be a success? What are you looking for in a candidate? Everyone asks that. You have to ask the questions that nobody is asking. How do you kind of build that skill of asking or talking in a way that nobody else is? And let's apply this actually to hostage negotiation. How does this apply to, what you did for the FBI, which is hostage negotiations?
Well, it's great, because you're talking about human behavior regardless. What a lot of people don't realize is that the way human beings make decisions do not change based on circumstances. It's still a human being, and a human being makes decisions in basic ways. It doesn't change. The head of Al-Qaeda makes decisions based on how humans make decisions. The head of IBM makes decisions on how humans make decisions. The circumstances do not change the dynamics. So first of all, what you have to do is you have to actually listen to the answers. Like even if you ask the same question that everybody else asks, nobody listens to the answers. Everybody's got a list of open-ended questions. Ask a question, person answers, move on to the next question, giving no indication whatsoever that you're listening. So the minute you start listening, you are 1 in 20. And maybe your odds are even better than, because nobody listens. Everybody's got a list of questions. They've been taught, ask the questions. Show interest by asking these questions. And make sure you ask all of them. So the minute you start demonstrating, not just listening, but demonstrating that you're listening by feeding back the answer, by summarizing, by paraphrasing, by making the other person feel heard. There's a magic spell called neuroscience and neurochemicals that instantly begin to be cast, which changes the other side's perspective against their will, because it's a neurochemical response. And that's how you distinguish yourself. You could ask the question, what are you looking for in a candidate? They answer, and then you say, well, I have this, I have this, I have this, I have this. Showing no real indication that you heard them by saying, all right, so it sounds like this is important to you. Let me summarize what you just said.
And tying in the neuroscience aspect, you're not really triggering any neurochemicals when you just list qualities about yourself. You're not triggering any neurochemicals on their side. So neurochemicals are triggered, let's say, when you give status or remove status. And those are two situations I can think of. The other thing is when you can well, those are the main things I can think of that would trigger kind of, let's say, dopamine or serotonin. Is securing status is kind of the serotonin, dangling higher status in front of them is the dopamine. So what are ways you can kind of trigger what's the neuroscience of this?
Yeah, it's a great question because, you just wrote the most commonly things that are weaponized against you. The whole phrase of asking for help. I need your help. Well, that's about theoretically triggering status in the other side. But it's used by the people that are victimizing me on a regular basis. As soon as somebody tells me they need my help, I turn around and walk away.
Yeah, you get like, what's that? What's wrong with that? As opposed to saying, can I ask you for advice, which seems a little softer.
Yeah, well, because the problem is the manipulative people caught on to that really fast, and I've been conned, I've been bamboozled by that 50 times already. So you may be genuine, but the bamboozlers led me down a garden path where, you didn't want my advice. You wanted to trick me into thinking that you like me so that you could sell me something that I don't need.
Right.
So when we first started working on a book, Never Split the Difference, doing it with Tall Ross. Tall's a genius. I don't know if you know Tall personally, great guy, like the best business book writer on planet Earth. Like everything he touches is readable, actionable, and either a New York Times or Wall Street Journal bestseller.
And that was a great book, Never Split the Difference. It was great. It was, I forget what year it was. You came on the podcast to promote that book, and it was such a great episode.
So early on, triggering the that's right moment is us, you're not after yes, you're after that's right. And so we're talking about with Tall, this is back in 2014, and there really isn't much neuroscience information. And Tall says, I think when you get somebody to say that's right, he says, I think you've triggered a subtle epiphany. And I'm like, let me do some research on epiphany. And then when you trigger an epiphany in somebody, you get serotonin, which you mentioned before, but you also get oxytocin. And oxytocin is a bonding drug. Additionally, I've since learned by listening to my friend Andrew Huberman's podcast, on one of his podcasts on relationships, which of course you're going to talk about oxytocin. He says that oxytocin inclines you to tell the truth. So when you trigger an epiphany in somebody by the feeling of being heard, they get a dose of oxytocin, which bonds them to you, makes them more honest with you. They get the serotonin, which is a drug of satisfaction, which makes them less demanding and want less. And so the feeling of being heard bonds them to you, makes them more honest, and makes them less demanding. Those are pretty good head starts.
So let's start with oxytocin then, and then I want to get back to this status, which is more dopamine and serotonin. So let me ask a question. So let's say I was talking to someone who had taken hostages, and I'm trying to get them to, I could say what you just said, actually, which is, listen, buddy, we all want to be heard. So I'm here for you to say whatever you want to say. So using the word we, does that kind of trigger the oxytocin?
No, it does not. It doesn't. A lot of people want it to. It's well-intentioned, but we is generally a disguise. It's a manipulative pronoun. How people use pronouns are great tells. And it's that in particular, faux empathy, fake empathy is used a lot of time. Like I won't say to you, we all want to be heard. I might say, look, you're doing this for a reason. You feel like you've never been heard. You feel victimized by whomever it might be. You feel like you're standing up for the downtrodden, the people who've had their rights denied to them, people who've been crushed by life circumstances, people that have been crushed by the colonial power that's currently occupying your country, stopping you from having a better life for your children, stopping you from worshiping your religion the way you want to I mean, that's how they feel. So the demonstration of understanding is not saying I understand, we all want to be understood. The demonstration of understanding is actually articulating what they think.
And so this will kind of create that bonding effect, that oxytocin boost for both sides.
Like to their side, like you're trying to give them a hit of oxytocin. That's why, you know, I made a point of saying it's a one-way bond. They're bonding to you. And that's why, like, constantly in hostage negotiations, SWAT guys and commanders are always scared the negotiators are bonding with the bad guy because they hear the bad guy bonding to the negotiator. And they're afraid that it's a two-way bond. And the negotiators are always like, what are you talking about? You know, I'm trying to get this guy out. Yeah, but if we got to line him up for a shot, that's my job too. I'm not going to save this guy's life at the risk of my ego or a hostage's life because he likes me. That didn't make me like him. And really before the understanding in the early hostage negotiation days, you know, the Stockholm syndrome, if you will. Nobody had any understanding of the neurochemicals. They just knew the bad guys were bonding to the good guys in ways. They figured like, well, last time somebody bonded with me, you know, we were buddies for the rest of our lives. So we must be losing a negotiator's perspective. And negotiators have always been confused by like, no, what are you talking about? I'm doing my job here.
So like, what's another example where kind of you set the bonding, you trigger that oxytocin. So now, like you say, they're more inclined to tell the truth. They're more inclined to deal with you. They feel closer to you.
Well, when I was in FBI New York, I was in a joint terrorist task force, and we have an investigation in civilian court over terrorists. You know, the stuff that the Bush administration said, we got to do it in Guantanamo Bay military bays, or military courts, because it's going to be the end of the world. Well, we had a terrorist prosecution in the Southern District of Manhattan. It wasn't the end of the world. We got a legitimate Muslim cleric on trial for crime, and we've got Arab Muslims. So they're from the Middle East. They grew up in the Middle East. They moved to the U.S. They're Muslims. They're sending money back to their family. And we get them testifying voluntarily in open court. How do we do that? I would sit down with them and I would say, you believe that for the last 200 years, there's been a succession of American governments that have all been anti-Islamic. And then I wouldn't shut up. But the First Amendment, I wouldn't explain, wouldn't deny nothing. I'd just shut up. And I'd look at them and they go like, yeah.
Now can I ask you a question? What if their first response is, because again, maybe they've had bad people talking to them before, or they're kind of like all been playing this out in their heads beforehand. What if their first response is, you don't know what I believe?
Well, then they're going to correct me. And then they're going to draw even closer to me because that gives them the status that you were talking about earlier. Correct. If you correct, you get status.
What would you say to get them to correct you as opposed to just being shelled up?
No, I would say, you know, I'm going to throw out what I think their beliefs are. And it's not fake or inauthentic on my part because I never said that I shared that belief. I agreed or I disagreed. I said, look, this is how you see this. This is what you believe. And then they're also used to the argument, following it. But this is why that's not true. They don't get that from the reaction that I just showed you where they're kind of blinking, they're looking around. That's the neurochemicals hitting their brain, where the shift is going on in front of your eyes. And the mere fact that I would take a shot at what they believe and not argue it, to them is delightful. And it was the truth. Like, I got no problem with saying to you what you believe. Because I'm not judging it. I'm not accepting it or rejecting it. I'm saying like, look, you're a human being and here's what you see and I'm not afraid of it.
And then what's next after that? So now you say this, but now you want to, again, from a neuroscience point of view, what's your next on your agenda?
Well, what I known that, you know, I've cleared their head and I'm looking for one or two moments. Now, when you approach somebody like this and they don't say anything, what that means is you're on the right track and there's more there that they would love to get out. They just don't trust you yet. So lack of reaction is actually a very good sign. And knowing that that's what that reaction means, then I'll say, and I probably just scratched the surface because that's the dynamic that's being indicated to me. There's probably a lot more there that I don't even know because that's the dynamic that they're indicating to me in a moment. If I've hit it enough, they're going to say, you know, yeah, I appreciate that. What do you want? But now they're open to finding out what I want because they've signaled to me they're ready to hear it. And I will slowly start to lay out what I think the next steps are, what I'm dealing with. And in this case, I might say something like, well, my problem is that we got this guy under arrest and we're prosecuting him for legitimate crimes. And my problem is, I think there's some information you might have which would shed light on the whole situation. Because when you start asking for help, essentially I'm asking for help. But they're used to you trying to make it a shared problem. We have this problem. And the first time you go with this we stuff, their initial reaction is going to be, that ain't my problem, that's your problem, pal. So
I like how you say, I have a problem.
Yeah.
Because after you've kind of built a little bit of a bond, you say, I have a problem, right when they're a little bit more primed to maybe listen to what your problem is.
Yeah, they're listening to it and they don't feel you trying to shift it to their responsibility in any way, shape, or form, which preserves their autonomy. Autonomy is a human existence issue. Right after you survive, the very next thing is, are you free? And, they're in a human being in the existence of mankind or civilization that was satisfied in slavery. So autonomy is just on the heels, if you will, on Maslow's hierarchy after staying alive. So if you don't try to take away their autonomy, they're more open to it. So I'm saying, this is my problem. Now, effectively, you're communicating that you're hoping for their help, but you're not putting them in a corner by actually asking for it. So that, again, you preserve their autonomy by giving them the option to weigh in or not. All right, so that's your problem. Since that's got nothing to do with me, I'm safe asking you what it is. And so we're going to proceed very slowly, very collaborative.
And so you present the problem. Your goal is to make them feel like the sort of person who is going to help you with this problem.
Well, my goal is really to make them feel like I'm respectful and collaborative, and that I'm not trying to corner them. I'm not interfering with their autonomy in any way. And that's your highest chance of success. It's not a guarantee of success, but what you need is long-term collaboration. Like, I could manipulate you, and there's a whole theory of interrogation that's largely been launched by CIA interrogators. And unfortunately, some law enforcement people have bought into it. It's called eliciting information. And what it is trying to get the person you're talking to focused on a short term, make them think that you're friends, and befriend them and get them focused on a short term and get them to say stuff to you that's going to hurt them long term. And what that is a guarantee of the loss of the relationship. I'm very much against eliciting information because by definition, it's deception from the beginning. And it works really good short term, and it just has bad long-term consequences. So the rapport-based interviews, the empathy-based, tactical empathy-based, business, personal, professional life, doesn't matter.
But won't the eliciting information technique look the same in the beginning? Like, you're going to try to bond, and then you're going to try to give respect, and then you're going to try to dangle some incentive, I guess.
In a lot of ways it does. And, one of the key issues there, and the difference is I'm never going to dangle an incentive. I'm never going to try to, I want you to feel that I'm collaborative and that you can trust me. I'm never going to act like I'm your friend, but I'm going to want you to trust me. Those are two different things. I'm not, because I want you to testify or I want to arrest you. If I want to arrest you and I'm acting like I'm your friend, and pretend like nothing bad's going to happen to you, I'm going to protect you from harm when in fact I'm planning on putting you in jail. That's deception by omission.
So how do you express, like, let's say you have this problem and then they say, hey, look, I'm not willing to help you. How do you then, do you switch tone? Like, how do you say, well, look, I'm going to have to arrest you if you don't help me? Like, how do you say that?
Well, you talk about two different guys. Am I talking to a suspect or am I talking to a witness?
Let's say a suspect.
Yes.
Okay, you go ahead.
If I'm interviewing a suspect, the information I'm gathering from the interview, I got an ongoing investigation, and I'm trying to get a feel for you, and I'm not planning on arresting you today. But if you're under arrest, I already got you. I'm not going to rely on the information from you to secure whether or not I'm going to convict you. Now, I'm going to give you a shot at talking. Maybe you want to trade your way out of this. This is cool. And this exactly happened in a terrorist case, the prosecution we had in the Southern District. You know, it was the 1990s, right after the first Trade Center bombing. Second terrorist cell is going to blow up 4 locations in New York City simultaneously. I'm one of the lead case agents. When we lock all these guys up, the instigator, the organizer, is my guy. I get to put handcuffs on him. I'm talking to him. We lock these guys up. It's about 1:30 in the morning. We're heading for the office. Courts don't open until 9 o'clock the following morning. We got to house them in the office overnight. I'm in the back of the car sitting next to this guy, and I go like, look, I got you. We're not going to interrogate you. I don't need you to talk. We've got to kill about 8 hours before the courts are open. I am not going to interrogate you. I've got you. So if we talk at all, it's not to trick you. I'm going to ask you if you need to get a drink of water. I'm going to ask you if you need to go to the bathroom. There's no interrogation. It's in your best interest to not say anything to me at all. I've got you. We're just going to take it easy. I'm going to tell you a couple of jokes. We're going to have a few laughs. You're going to get arraigned in the morning. You're probably going to get released on bond. If you're not, you're going to be remanded. You're going to get an attorney. But relax, because I'm not going to interrogate you. And the rest of the night went down exactly like that. We kept them in the office. We kept them as comfortable as we could. Stood up in front of the judge following morning. He was remanded custody, MCC. A year later, he decides to cooperate. Reaches out for the Southern District of New York and initially says, I want to cooperate with you guys, the prosecutors, federal United States attorney, Southern District of New York. But don't tell the FBI. And they go like, we can't do that. We got to tell the FBI. They got to be involved. And he said, okay, I'll talk to Chris. And he wouldn't talk to anybody other than me because I treated him with such respect earlier. And I had him under arrest. I wasn't going to interrogate him to entertain me. And I treat everybody I ever locked up with respect. And if they decide they want to cooperate, chances are they're going to ask for me.
And just as an aside, do you think there's a lot of terrorist activities that the FBI stopped that we have no clue about?
Oh, without question.
What would have happened if there was no FBI, for instance? Like, what would have happened in New York City? Let's say post 9/11.
Well, like they were after us all over North America. And it was actually very frustrating at that point in time in post 9/11 because we went into strict deterrence. Which means as soon as you find out a plot is brewing, you're going to interdict it and not lock people up. You're just going to disrupt it, or maybe just lock a couple of them up and a whole bunch of them are going to get away. What you're doing by interdicting without arresting or interdicting early is educating them on how you found it. And we went into this complete shield defense for good reasons, but that I knew of. We probably interdicted 20 more terrorist attacks in the first couple of months, 18 months, 2 years. You disrupt the organization, you educate them, you move them on, which is the problem with interdiction, extreme interdiction. And it's scary to let an investigation play out. The one where we locked these guys up with the 4 bombing plots, they had actually been targeting blowing up our building. We were aware of it probably for about 2.5, 3 months before we locked them all up. We couldn't tell, the federal building in New York, the FBI is not the only agency there. We couldn't tell any of the other agencies. I remember the senior manager, when he had to go to the other agencies in the building and say, oh, by the way, those guys we just locked up last night, they've been planning on blowing up the building for the last 3 months. They went, what? And you didn't tell us? But, we were on top of them and we locked them all up. I mean, we took out several cells instead of 3 guys when we did that, and we set them back for years.
Well, I'm glad you did. I lived across the street from that building, so you did a good job, soldier. Thank you for your service. But what's the worst thing that you think would have happened? Was there anything like on the scale of 9/11 that was stopped that
You know, there was stuff on that scale both before and after.
Hmm.
Right after the first World Trade Center bombing, the instigator was Ramzi Youssef, who is the actual nephew of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the guy who organized 9/11. He's still in Guantanamo as we speak.
there was some news about him recently?
Yeah. The Justice Department, I think they want to cut some sort of, the prosecutors want to cut some sort of deal, and Attorney General threw the deal out the window. But anyway, so, I mean, these are the links between the terrorists. His nephew did the 93 bomb on the Trade Center. Now, he managed to get away and get in, as we would say, get into the wind, and then get locked up for several years. He had plotted to blow up 12 airliners simultaneously over the Pacific Ocean. While in a few years that he was on a run, he was operating out of the Philippines. Two investigators from New York Joint Terrorist Task Force, Frank Pellegrino and Matt Bashir, were hot on Ramzi's trail for several years. And Frank and Matt uncovered the plot to blow up the 12 airliners based out of Manila. And Frank and Matt's pursuit of Ramzi disrupted that. And Ramzi ultimately got locked up in Pakistan while he was running for Frank. So yeah, there was plenty of stuff that was interdicted along the way by FBI agents that were just bloodhounds. They weren't giving up. Frank.
I mean, why do you think nothing has happened basically since 9/11? Like, is it that you're that good, like the FBI and the CIA and so on are that good, or is there some level of incompetence on the other side, or?
It's a really legitimate question. And, I'm listening to Elon Musk talk about something on another podcast the other day, and he's talking about the tides of history and the captains of the ship. It's both factors. What are the tides of histories and how competent are the captains of the ship? And then how much luck is involved? Shortly after, not terribly long after 9/11, we get into the war in Iraq, and that turns into one of the biggest debacles in the history of American foreign policy, which springs up Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And, Al-Qaeda then immediately starts going into the kidnap for murder, public murder, and execution business through most of 2004. And I was involved in trying to interdict and dissuade that, and they ultimately got out of that business based on how bad we made them look. So their business evolved, if you will. They were getting all the PR that they needed for a while out of Baghdad by murdering people on camera and putting it out on Al Jazeera. And then they got out of their business. They found out how lucrative kidnapping was, and they're still doing it in Africa. They're still funding global operations from Al-Qaeda by the kidnap for ransom because they made a lot of money in Baghdad. Then the organization evolves, and about 10 years after, ISIS springs up. The heads of ISIS were the lieutenants of Al-Qaeda in Baghdad 10 years earlier. So there's an evolution of organizations, and there's the tides of history. And those of us that are, we're not the captains of the ship, but maybe we're the gunners. We're doing the best we can and trying to keep up as best we can.
And so, again, back to negotiation, you were the FBI's leading hostage negotiator. What are some kind of tools of the trade that you felt were maybe maybe they could be bluntly called techniques, but what are like some go-to techniques that you knew you could rely on in most situations?
The nuts thing is, this thing that we call tactical empathy, the demonstration of understanding. Like, people are not ready for that. Like, it doesn't matter who you aren't ready for it. You're not used to being listened to. You're used to being argued with. Used to being either argued with or followed. And the followers don't listen either. They're drones. But for somebody to actually listen to you without arguing with you, like, that's astonishing. That's refreshing. It doesn't matter who you are. And so I did it in kidnap negotiations because it would catch the other side so off guard. Like, they were argued. They were bargained with. They were argued with. Nobody ever actually listened to them and fed it back to them. And these, this oxytocin, serotonin thing, like, they're not used to that. And this is wiring that people are born with. There's some interesting conversations going on now about the difference between feelings and emotions. And one set is something you're born with, and the other set is something you learn through conditioning. And I think the argument is that you're born with the feelings of anger, sadness, enjoyment. I think there's 5 or 6 of them. You're born with them. It's how you're wired just because you were born. And the rest of them evolve based on the way your life evolves. You know, the detachment syndrome is because you weren't held enough in the first year of your life, whether you're an orphan or whether your family just didn't hold you. You know, that's a conditioned thing. It's argued that many sociopaths become sociopaths because they're conditioned that there are no rules by inconsistent discipline by their parents. So that's a conditioned thing, but that doesn't change that you were born with certain neurochemicals and a limbic system because you're human. And tactical empathy is about, let's confine ourselves to the stuff that I know you were born with. And you were born with a limbic system, and in broad terms, it's going to function in certain ways. And if I can trigger your oxytocin, especially if you're used to being argued with, you're going to be drawn to me. You're not going to know why, and you're not even going to know it's happened, and it's going to change things. It's literally a magic spell. I feel like, Dumbledore from Harry Potter. You're not going to know it happened.
So like in a kidnapping case, a person has a specific agenda. They want money.
Right.
And they know you've got money, right? They kidnap someone who they've researched. They know the other side has money.
They haven't researched it. They're going to use the negotiation process to figure out what they can get. That's their research. There's going to be a certain set of parameters they're going to go with to begin with. Like for the longest time in Haiti's model was carjack a car with more than one person in it. If they're in a car in Haiti, they at least have money for gas. And Haiti being so ridiculously poor, they have assets. Now, it's your job, because they were in a car, it's a pre-qualifier. It's your job in a negotiation to figure out how many assets they have. And then what kidnappers globally get really good at is figuring out how much money you have. Like you could ask for $1 million, but if they only got 10,000, you ain't getting $1 million. So your job in a negotiation is figure out, do they have 10,000 or do they have $1 million?
And so how do you do that?
Well, then the whole bargaining process. Like how quickly you're going to give in. And there's a methodology. It's the Ackerman model. Mike Ackerman, former CIA guy, started a K&R, kidnapping ransom consulting company. I learned the Ackerman model early on. I told this Ackerman, I ultimately meet Mike, and I'm like, hey, Mike, I heard you thought this up. I give attribution. Just want to know if it's true. And he's like, yeah, it did. And I vetted it through your buddies at Harvard. And your friends at Harvard told me this model will work under any circumstances. It works because it's a good bargaining model. So what I'm going to do in Ackerman is make you feel like you got our last dime. And there's a very specific methodology if you get into hard bargaining. Now, I'm going to try to head it off before we get there. And I'm going to use empathy, and it's going to catch you off guard. And I'm going to use deference because it's going to catch you off guard. You're not used to being deferred to. You're not used to me being a methodology that exhausts you. You're used to me arguing. People get energy from arguing. Anger gives you energy. I'm not going there. I'm not going to use anger to give me energy nor give you energy. Empathy, in a bare-knuckle bargaining situation, empathy is going to suck the life out of you.
Let's say these techniques, though, are not working somehow. Like, I remember in Never Split the Difference, you doing things like, well, is there someone I can talk? You would say to the guy, is there someone I can talk to who can make a decision about this? Or you kind of reduce their status a little bit.
Well, they mean ask that of me. But I'm going to be very cautious about their status. And empathy is a diagnostic. That's what a lot of people don't realize. It's designed as a rapport building and an information gathering process. So I'm going to realize there's a lot of information I don't have and what's going to be my best source, person I'm talking to on the other side. So I'm engaging to feel you out. I'm using specific negotiation techniques and realizing that every one of your responses tells me more about you and your situation. For a long time, we thought about drawing a direct correlation to the skills and sonar, because sonar is about bouncing sound off the other side and then reading how the sound comes back to you. And so the communication, of verbal communication, or however we communicate, we're going to read how it comes back to us to give us a clearer picture of what the other side, what they're looking at, what their timeline is. Everybody has a timeline, period. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your circumstances are. You have a timeline. And what I need to know is what that timeline is. And then after that, what's your effort timeline, what's your emotional timeline, what's your emotional budget, if you will. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to run your emotional budget out sooner on your timeline so we get to an outcome positive faster than you originally planned because you spent your emotional budget.
So emotional timeline, meaning they're just going to be sick of talking to you after a certain amount of time, or?
Well, they're going to be exhausted by the process, not necessarily sick of talking to you because that's slightly different feeling, but they're going to be exhausted by the process. And then you're going to have a pretty good feel of their timeline in advance. And it's going to be based on a local environment. Like in Haiti, and it's still the case, it's short-term criminal behavior. And they're not fundamentalists of any religion. So what does that mean? The stupid thing that it means is they probably want to chill on the weekend. There's a pretty good chance you want to party on Saturday night. So you're going to settle on Fridays, early Saturday. You're never settling on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. It's just not going to happen. So you got to understand their local timelines based on what their culture is, their atmosphere, it's their environment. It's humans within the environment. Now, used to be Colombia, South America. The FARC, they did so many kidnappings. They had this huge infrastructure built up. The last case that I worked that resolved after I left the bureau, there were hostages that were held down there for 6 years. So, you got to understand what's the infrastructure of the people on the other side. The Colombia, the FARC, the ELN, they've been in business for a long time. They got a huge infrastructure in the mountains. Haiti kidnapping gangs, these dudes are living day to day. They don't have a robust infrastructure.
And so how do you reduce their emotional bandwidth? Like how do you kind of wear them out emotionally?
Well, you know when they're going to settle, when they're not. You're going to know how they're engaged. Are their threats going to be a great indicator? Specificity of the threats. The more specific the threats get, the closer you are to the end of their timeline. Like if you don't pay us by 12 noon tomorrow, hostage is dead. That's pretty specific. On a Monday, if we don't get our money, we're going to kill them. They've given you no timeline. They're just making noise. They want to see how scared you are, how much money you're going to throw on the table. And what they would do in Haiti on a regular basis, or any other country that's into short-term criminal kidnapping, you pay them what they want right up front, and their response is, oh, you misunderstood. That was a down payment. So you can't pay them what they ask. If you're selling a car, James, you're selling your car in the U.S. You want $5,000 for your car. Dude walks up, takes one look at it, says, you got it. Here's $5,000 on the spot. Brought cash with me. It's all yours. Your reaction is like, oh, man, I should have asked for more.
Right.
Now, that dude is standing right there with you. We're in the United States. You got some obligation. You're probably going to hand a car over. Kidnappers, you're separated by several hundred miles at least. You give them what they want. They get time to change their mind. They're not accountable. They're like, oh, that was too easy. We're just getting started. Plus, it's Monday. You already gave me my party money for the weekend. We could hold out for 2 weeks instead of 5 days because we're funded now. So you got to make them feel they got the best deal they could. Just like when you're selling your car. That same dude, you're selling your car for $5,000. A guy comes up to you and they're like, oh, man.
You're not sure if they're going to cut off an ear or something to prove that they're for real. How do you balance the risks in these types of negotiations?
Well, you're going to get information on the dynamic of the industry before you walk in the door. Like, you're going to find out from the State Department, like every industry has a timeline. Every country is different. You got to find out from previous cases what they're looking at, what it's probably going to be. On a criminal case, without a robust infrastructure, it's short-term. It's always short-term. Always. And they're always looking to chill on the weekend. And so then you got a couple of other questions. What's going on? There was a kidnapping gang in Mexico on a regular basis. They cut off the finger of every person they kidnapped. Every single person they kidnapped, they got ransomed out. But every time that was their style, it was their MO. They chopped a finger off everybody they ever kidnapped. And so victims like, my family's going to pay, you don't need to cut my finger off. And it's been reported to me that the guy holding them said, yeah, we cut everybody's finger off. So there's a certain minimal amount of research. And then as soon as they start communicating with you, it's really specificity and understanding what's vague and what's specific and the difference. And the more, if they say, all right, so if you don't pay the ransom, your son's going to die. When? Well, we didn't say when. How's he going to die? Well, we didn't say how. Well, he could be there for 10,000 years. He could die of old age. They've left themselves out. They know they've left themselves out because they don't want to get pinned into a corner.
Do you specifically then ask when? Do you try to get specifics, or do you wait for them to say specifics?
No, there are a lot of other issues. I'm going to institute empathy and deference and genuine questions from the very beginning. And I'm going to let this thing play out because I need to know. I need to get a feel for you. I need to talk to you long enough when I know when you're gaslighting me versus when you're telling me the truth. And if I talk to you long enough, I'm going to figure that out.
Like what sort of questions? Like at this, as far as they're concerned, they think there's one issue. We have somebody, we want money for him. How do you kind of broaden the list of conversation topics?
Well, what are the legitimate questions? The first question is, how do I know he's alive? Like, that's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
There's 3 legitimate questions, and legitimate questions are, the other side can't argue whether or not they're legitimate. Number 1, how do I know he's alive? Number 2, how do I know you got him? Number 3, if I pay, how do I know you're going to let him go? Those are all legitimate issues because there are plenty of kidnappers that fake they got the hostage.
Is it legitimate to also ask, are you the decision maker?
No. You're going to figure that out. First of all, the guy you're talking to, like there's only one case that I ever worked where we were talking to the decision maker, and it was a lone kidnapper, and it was the only case they ever had a lone kidnapper. I'm going to figure that out based on your pronouns. If you're using lots of we's, lots of plural pronouns, you're influential. You're trying to hide your influence. Just like a great business negotiation. You talk to a CEO in a great business negotiation, and this guy goes, look, I got a board of directors. I'm accountable. And if I make the wrong decision, those guys are going to fire me. So I can't make the decision because I got to take this back to my board. That board is doing whatever that CEO says. He's just smart enough to not get backed into the corner. So anybody in love with plural pronouns is an extremely influential person. Singular pronoun guy, it's the same as a bartender. You walk into a bar, it's probably the guy's first night, and you ask him, I like Balvenie Scotch, so I need a 12-year-old Balvenie. And the bartender says, I don't stock that in my bar. It's not his bar. And he's probably not going to be there 6 months from now. So you're in any negotiation, if you're talking to somebody who's in love with singular pronouns, they're trying to make themselves more important because they are not important on their side of the table. And this is emotional compensation for them to make themselves feel important. So I'm going to diagnose
how do you use that information?
Well, it makes me smarter every step of the way. At some point in time, I know that whatever I bounce off this guy, he's got to take to somebody else. So I'm like, I'm cool with that. I know what's going on. I expect that to happen. So I'm going to start asking this guy what and how questions. How do I know he's alive? And this poor guy's like, how the hell do I know? How are you going to know? I'm just here to get money. This actually happened. I'm working a case out of Ecuador. It's the first time we shift over to the how questions, like just relentless with how. Pepe Escobar escapes after 28 days. Resourceful guy. Bonded with his kidnappers. We're chewing up the clock, giving him more time to bond. His emotional instincts are through the roof. Finally, at the point they're barely keeping track of him, he goes out the back window of a hut in the middle of the jungle, 2:00 in the morning, driving rainstorm. He knows he's just got to get a quarter of a mile away. They're never going to be able to follow him because the rain's going to wash away his footprints. Go to visit him with his family in upstate New York. because this is the first time we tried this. And I thought we were going to get him on the phone. We never got him on the phone. And, I'm doing a hostage survival debrief, psychologically, how did you preserve yourself emotionally? But I really want to find out what happened with my strategy, because I thought we were going to trigger him to put him on the phone, and they never did. And he says, it was crazy. They sent this guy to town, and he was supposed to stay in the town until he got a ransom. And then he was supposed to come back out and tell the boss what the ransom was. And the boss was going to say yes or no. But instead, he kept coming back out saying, his wife's saying, how do we know he's alive? And I don't know what to do with that. What should I do? So that for over 2 weeks, the terrorists are thinking about taking Pepe to town to put him on a phone. Now, what does that mean? We totally disrupted their operation. They didn't get mad about it. And they got emotionally invested into taking care of him and being nice to him, because they thought they were going to have to drag him to town to put him on a phone, which then created the opportunity for him to escape on his own in the middle of the night. So that's what happens. Your representative with deference doesn't know what to do. And instead of waiting till he's got a package to present to the boss, where the boss gives a thumbs up or a thumbs down, they start collaborating far sooner, and you create a dynamic that's in your favor among your adversaries on the other side.
So someone listening to this, let's say, and they're thinking about it in the context of their own lives, like, let's say they're negotiating a merger or a salary, whatever. How do they take this? So it's not a life and death situation, but how do they take this? So yes, the tactical empathy, like bonding, show the other person you're listening, that they're being heard or understood. And then how do you kind of veer it towards an outcome that you would desire?
Well, yeah, first of all, you're collaborative. And there's a difference between being collaborative and cooperative. Cooperative is your passive. Collaborative is your player. You're involved. And then you said it's not a life and death situation. Like, James, you got an amygdala and a limbic system. You were born with it, and it's from the caveman, and your limbic system doesn't know the difference between the caveman being chased by a saber-toothed tiger or you being yelled at by an adversary. So we've all got that. It's a caveman response, and our limbic system does not know the difference. So the emotional reactions are always the same, and that's why this always works. Why the emotional reactions are always the same. That's why this works more than anything else does. And there's a fine line between that distinction that I made. But it's entirely the same. People want to be collaborated with, they want to be involved, and they have the same basic fears. And so you can begin to do that with deference, and you can start to trigger the other side's inclination towards you by how you approach them, and you shorten the timeline. Nothing affects deal timelines like relationships. So it's either going to be an accelerator or it's going to be friction. And empathy is an accelerator. So you're going to get to your deal sooner with these same techniques, because they were born with a limbic system that has reacted for the same way since the dawn of civilization, according to Elon Musk, about 5,500 years ago, I think.
So, right. So treating them with deference, but then again, like, okay, you say, I have a problem. My problem is, I'm trying to figure out how to value my company and so that we can merge, or I'm trying to figure out how all the pieces are going to connect when these two companies come together, or I'm trying to figure out how to be the strategic lead for this project, but still make ends meet and blah, blah, blah. Like, how do you kind of, and then they're listening to you. Or do you sort of just assume they're going to kind of meet you halfway, or is there any way to kind of like jog that along?
Well, yeah. A couple things in there that I love that you asked me, like meet me halfway. Like that, it never split the difference, always collaborate. So halfway may not be the best outcome. So how do I find the best outcome? I'm going to say, all right, so before I present my case, let me see if I could summarize how you feel about this. Here's how you see this situation. Now, what's going to happen is if I hit the bullseye, bang, oxytocin, serotonin, all the advantages that gives them. You bond to me, you were honest with me, you want less. If I miss the bullseye, and you correct me, the thing that you talked about earlier is I'm triggering status with you. You're mentoring me. You're helping me. Now, we're also out of the adversarial position. There's nothing more satisfying than correction. Like, it's insane. And so it's to my favor to really wrap my brain about that, because people hate to be corrected. They're embarrassed by it. They'd rather die than be embarrassed. But empathy is about the other side, and the other side loves to correct. They're helping me. They're mentoring me. So I'm going to start throwing out a summary, and what I get wrong, you're going to correct me because it feels so good. And that dynamic works in my favor also. And then the great thing about the correction, like, your idea may be better than mine. I need to know what you got. You've got stuff I don't know. I got stuff you don't know. I'm hiding information. It's important to me. So are you. If we could just lay our cards on the table, we'd come up with something extraordinary, but we're both afraid of being exploited. So what I want to do, I want to engage in behavior that's going to give me the best chance that you'll lay your cards on the table first. And that's what correction, serotonin, summary, all these woo-woo empathy skills, they're actually incredibly powerful.
And so once you say something and they've corrected you, but now you still want the merger to go through at the highest possible valuation, or you still want the highest possible salary. Like, what's next to kind of, again, get them to help you close this deal?
Well, all right. So what are the first principles? Why I get away with this? Like, one of my currency is authenticity, and I believe in long-term relationships, prosperity. And not only am I going to state that, but you're going to feel that based on everything that I say. So if my goal is for you and me to prosper together for the next 20 years, and it is, then you're going to start opening it up to me. You're going to get out of short-term thinking, quarterly profits, and you're going to start thinking about a 20-year long tail of prosperity. And it begins to change your valuation. So then, let's say we've negotiated in good faith, and I still don't like the deal. For me, for my company, what we do, I will say, look, I can't make this deal. And I understand, here's why you want what you want, and you're entitled to that. Now, here's what I have to have in order for us to have a 20-year run together, where 20 years from now, we both look back on this and go like, this is the best deal I ever made. What I'm doing is I'm not backing you into a corner, but I'm showing you what prosperity looks like with me so that you say yes or no. I never leave my business partners wondering how we could have made a deal. Every time we get close to the finish line, there's never going to be any doubt in your mind what I'm after, because I never want to be in a position where 5 years later you say, oh my God, if you'd have just told me, I could have done that. I didn't know. So I'm a believer in authenticity in long-term relationships, and this works out really well for me. I made some great deals. I made a deal once where I said, as is, I'll sign. Understand, when I get ready to tell you what I'm going to tell you, you don't have to give it to me. I'm going to sign the deal that you put in front of me right now, as is. Here's where it fell short. And every single time they've gone back and they've either met that condition or they improved something. Because I'm not holding a gun to their head. I said, look, I'll sign it right now. Make no mistake. I'm not taking you hostage over this. I'm not holding a gun to your head. But if I don't tell you, then you can blame me for not telling you. And I never want to be in that position.
That's really brilliant, because they don't want you to resent the deal afterwards. So, and now you've built this relationship, so they don't want you to be resentful.
It's a two-way street, and resentment is expensive.
So fascinating. The whole aspects of negotiation are really fascinating, and you've been the expert on this for so long. Again, I so appreciate your book. I always still refer to it. I've written about it, Never Split the Difference, and now this documentary is amazing.
Yeah, let's talk about it a little bit, can we? You're a friend of mine, Nick Nandan, Emmy-winning director.
Yeah. I mean, this documentary sort of follows your career and the things you've learned at different aspects of your career.
Right. It's on Amazon. People can see it on Amazon as we speak. And Nick did a great job. it shows I'm from Iowa. It touches on Kansas City time, small town boy from Iowa, and then some significant cases that shaped my thinking on negotiation. They're not all good. If anybody tells you they succeed all the time, they're lying to you.
And also some kind of historically important cases, like the George Floyd case you cover, and like how
we touch on that.
Police could escalate or de-escalate from there. There was an interesting thing mentioned at the end where you say how anger lowers IQ.
Yes.
And so you don't want either side, like you don't want to be angry, because then both sides are going to end up being angry and just the negotiations falling apart, or negotiation goes falling apart because everyone just loses IQ.
Yeah. And I didn't realize until somebody mentioned this to me just 2 days ago. Not only does anger give you IQ, but it lowers your IQ and it gives you energy. Now think about that double whammy combination. Like you're dumber and you have more energy. That's what anger does to you.
Yeah. I learned so much watching this documentary. I highly recommend everybody watch this because you see you in action. It's not just reading about it. Like you see you and the other people that you've worked with, that you've learned from in action, doing their thing. And I can't think of a more valuable visual guide to negotiation than watching the best in the world do it.
Yeah, thank you, James. Did you give me a rating? Did you rate it?
Because I'm doing the podcast, I got like a link to it. So I got to go on Amazon now and review it. I will do that though.
It's like, I'm like a Lyft driver here,
It's 5 stars and I'll give you a good tip. By the way, I always tell the Uber drivers, I'm going to give you 5 stars because I want them to give me 5 stars. Is that a good strategy or not?
No, I love it. Yeah, you're first of all, you're an authentic guy, and I'm sure they sense that in you. And you're leading with generosity. Like you don't ask, but you're looking for generosity. You're looking for reciprocity. I think it's brilliant. I love it.
All right, good. And then I want to ask you one more negotiating tactic. This happened to me recently where I was in a small sort of negotiation and someone said this phrase, James, I know you're an honorable man, so, and then blah, blah, blah. Like, he continues what he's asking for. But that impacted me. Like then after that, I wanted to continue to appear to this person like an honorable person. Like, oh, I'm an honorable person. This person thinks I'm honorable. And it kind of like made the negotiation, as you said, go faster because I was more sympathetic to his cause all of a sudden.
Yeah, there's something about...
So he like shaped me by putting a definition around me.
Well, what he did was he called out a positive emotion or a positive feeling or a positive attribute. And that tends to reinforce it. My words are very carefully chosen. I said tends to. Now, the other thing that went into this context between your interactions was you've already got a gun instinct reaction to this guy. So your supercomputer, your instinct, is giving you a read on whether or not this is manipulation or genuine.
I see. Because he was a friend anyway, so it tended to work better. If it was just a plain negotiation where he didn't really know me that well, it might have had a negative effect.
Your guard would have been up more. You would have had as much of an instinctive feel for this person. And your supercomputer instinct, I mean, is everybody's instinct is good. It's whether we're listening to our instinct or our amygdala is the question. And that's triggering, you had an instinct on him, and then he labeled a positive, and it tends to reinforce a positive.
Well, Chris Voss, Tactical Empathy, the documentary on Amazon, done by my buddy Nick Nandan, who's such a great director, producer of documentaries, everything. Like, such a good human being. And the fact that he even did a documentary on you, Chris, says something about you. Like, I know all the subjects of his documentaries, they're all like great people, except for me. But that's
not true. Not true. Not true.
So thanks so much for coming on the podcast again. Great to have you, and hope you come on again sometime soon.
James, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.